I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, not in the way people in small towns whisper about shadows and spirits, because I had always trusted logic, routine, and the comfort of explanations. And that was exactly why I accepted the night security job at Jefferson High School, an old American high school built decades ago on the outskirts of quiet town, where nothing ever truly happened. A town where nights were silent, streets were empty after dark, and the loudest sound you'd usually hear was the wind brushing against closed storefronts. And at first the job felt almost too easy. Just me, a security desk, a row of CCTV monitors, and long hours of silence broken only by my footsteps as I walked through empty hallways checking doors and windows, telling myself that boredom was better than danger. Yet from the very first night, something about the building felt wrong, not threatening in an obvious way, but heavy, like the air itself was carrying a memory it refused to let go of. And every time midnight passed, the temperature seemed to drop unnaturally, especially near the stairwell that led to the third floor, a floor that had been partially closed for years and rarely mentioned. And whenever I asked other staff about it, they would shrug, avoid eye contact, or laugh nervously and change the subject, which I dismissed as small-town superstition, because old buildings always inspired stories, and fear thrived where answers were inconvenient. Or so I thought, until the night everything changed, a night that began like any other, with me sitting alone in the security office around 2 a.m, fighting sleep as the clock ticked forward, my eyes scanning the monitors in a dull rhythm, when suddenly, at exactly 2:17 a.m, a sound cut through the silence, so faint at first I almost ignored it, a soft echo that didn't belong, the distant sound of children laughing, not loud or playful, but low and distorted, as if it were coming from the end of a long hallway, bouncing off walls that should have been empty, and my body tensed instantly, because schools at night don't laugh. They creak, they groan, they settle, but they don't laugh. And I leaned closer to the monitors, checking each camera feed, watching empty corridors, locked doors, dark classrooms, telling myself it had to be my imagination, a memory echoing in my head after too many quiet nights. Yet the laughter continued, drifting and fading, growing closer, and then pulling away again. And before I could calm myself, another sound joined it, sharp and metallic, a loud bang that made me jump, followed by another and another, slow and deliberate, like lockers being slammed shut one by one. And I watched in disbelief as a camera on the third floor hallway flickered, the image distorting for a second before stabilizing, revealing a long row of lockers stretching into darkness. And then, right in front of my eyes, one locker door shook violently and slammed shut on its own, followed by another farther down the hall, and then another, moving in sequence toward the camera, each slam echoing to the speakers like a heartbeat growing louder, and panic surged through me as my rational explanations collapsed, because there was no wind, no students, no reason for any of this to be happening. And my hands trembled as I grabbed the radio, calling out to see if anyone else was on site, even though I knew I was alone, receiving nothing but static in response. And, despite every instinct telling me to stay put, to lock the door and wait until morning, a sick sense of responsibility, mixed with fear and disbelief, pushed me to stand up, grab my flashlight, and step out into the hallway, where the silence felt thicker than before, pressing against my ears as I walked toward the stairwell, each step echoing too loudly, as if the building itself was listening. And when I reached the third floor, the air changed instantly, colder, heavier, carrying a faint smell of smoke that had no logical source, and the lights above flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the floor. And as I moved forward, my flashlight beam shaking, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Small handprints smeared across the metal lockers, burned dark into the surface, as if they'd been pressed there with unbearable heat. And before I could process what that meant, a soft creaking sound echoed down the hallway, and at the far end, a classroom door began to open, slowly, inch by inch, revealing nothing but darkness beyond it, a darkness that seemed deeper than it should have been, swallowing the light instead of reflecting it. And I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away, as the laughter returned, quieter now, closer, right behind the door, and against all reason, against every warning my body was screaming, I took a step forward, then another, drawn toward that open classroom like something inside me already knew that this was the moment everything would change, unaware that once I crossed that threshold, I would never truly leave that school behind. The moment I stepped fully inside the classroom, every instinct in my body screamed that I should run, because the air felt wrong, thick and suffocating, as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades, carrying a faint but unmistakable smell of smoke, ash, and something rotten beneath it, like burned paper mixed with old fear. And as my flashlight beam swept across the room, my mind struggled to accept what my eyes were showing me. Rows of old wooden desks arranged neatly, each one occupied by a small figure sitting perfectly still, their posture unnaturally straight, their feet dangling just inches above the floor. And at first I tried to convince myself they were mannequins, props left behind from some forgotten school event. Anything that could explain why children were sitting in a sealed classroom at 2 a.m. But that illusion shattered the moment one of them moved, slowly lifting its head with a soft cracking sound that echoed to the room. And when the light hit, its face, my breath caught in my throat, because the face wasn't human anymore. The skin looked burned and melted, features blurred together as if heat had erased them, and where the eyes should have been there were only dark, hollow sockets that seemed to absorb the light instead of reflecting it. And then another child lifted its head, and another, until every single one of them was staring directly at me, their necks twisting at impossible angles, accompanied by a sickening sound of bones grinding against bone. And my legs refused to move, my body frozen as the temperature in the room dropped sharply, my breath turning visible as if I were standing outside in winter. And then they began to whisper, dozens of voices overlapping into one distorted murmur that filled the classroom, crawling into my ears, into my head, repeating the same broken questions over and over again, asking why no one had come, why the doors were locked, why they were still there. And the sound grew louder, more desperate, until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. And suddenly one of the children stood up, its chair scraping loudly across the floor, the sound making me flinch as it took a slow step toward me, its small shoes leaving faint scorch marks on the ground. And when it spoke, its voice was calm, almost polite, completely disconnected from the horror of its appearance, asking me if tonight was finally the night they were allowed to go home. And the moment those words reached me, something inside my mind broke open, and memories that weren't mine flooded in without warning, violent flashes of the past forcing themselves into my thoughts. I saw flames racing up the stairwell, smoke filling the halls, alarms that never rang, emergency exits chained shut, teachers pounding desperately on locked doors while children screamed and cried behind them, their voices growing weaker as the smoke stole their breath. And then I saw the aftermath, administrators standing outside, the building watching firefighters battle the blaze, their faces not filled with grief, but with calculation, already discussing damage control, reputation, and silence. And I dropped to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of those memories, realizing that what I was witnessing wasn't just a haunting, but a moment frozen in time, a wound that had never healed. And as the whispers turned into screams, the classroom began to change around me, the walls darkening with soot, the ceiling cracking as imaginary flames licked upward, heat washing over me so intensely that my skin burned, and small hands grabbed onto my arms, my jacket, my shoulders, not aggressively, but desperately, clinging to me as if I were their last chance, their last witness. And panic tore through me as I shouted that I didn't know, that I wasn't the one who locked the doors, that I wasn't the one who chose silence over lives. But my words felt weak against their suffering, and the child standing in front of me tilted, its head slowly, its hollow eyes fixed on mine, and asked again, softer this time, if tonight was a night someone would finally tell the truth. And that question cut deeper than fear ever could, because in that moment I understood that they weren't trapped because they died. They were trapped because they were forgotten, because their story had been buried under renovations, paperwork, and lies. And as the flames roared louder, the pressure in my chest grew unbearable, until I screamed that I remember them now, that I would never forget what happened here. And the instant those words left my mouth, everything stopped, the fire vanished, the screams were cut off mid-echo, the hands released me, and I found myself alone on the cold classroom floor, the desks empty, the air silent and freezing, as if nothing had ever happened. And when I staggered to my feet and ran from that room, down the hallway and toward the stairs, I didn't dare look back, because I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting, hoping that this time someone had finally heard them. I quit the job the very next morning, my hand still shaking as sunlight poured through the office windows like it was trying to convince me the night had never happened. And when I sat across from the school principal and told him everything, from the laughter at 2:17 a.m. to the children in the classroom and the fire that replayed itself in my mind, I expected him to laugh, to accuse me of stress or imagination. But instead his face went pale, his eyes dropping to the desk as if I had spoken, a name he hadn't heard in years. And for a long moment he said nothing, then quietly locked his office door and finally told me the truth the town had buried for decades, explaining how in 1998 a fire had broken out on the 3rd floor during after-school hours, how faulty wiring sparked near a storage room, how smoke spread faster than anyone anticipated, and how 12 children attending a late program were trapped when emergency exits failed, alarms malfunctioned, and fire doors that were supposed to release automatically never opened. And as firefighters fought the blaze, administrators stood outside making calls, already worried about lawsuits, funding, and reputation. And when the investigation began, pressure was applied, reports were altered, blame was shifted, and eventually the incident was reduced to a brief local headline before disappearing entirely. The 3rd floor sealed, renovated, and quietly erased from memory. And as he spoke, I realized that what haunted Jefferson High wasn't random terror. It was precision, a cycle bound to time itself. Because every year, on the exact anniversary of the fire, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the moment smoke overtook the floor and hope died, the children returned, reliving their final moments, waiting for acknowledgement, for someone to remember them. And I left town that same week, convinced that distance would save me, that once I put miles between myself and that school, the nightmares would fade. But I was wrong, because memory doesn't respect geography. And even now, years later, I wake up every night at exactly 2:17 a.m. without an alarm, my heart racing as if something has called me. And in the silence of my bedroom, I can hear lockers slamming softly, one by one, and faint laughter drifting through hallways that no longer exist. And sometimes, when the world is quiet enough, I hear their voices again, not screaming this time, but whispering, asking if people still remember them, if the truth has finally been told. And I've tried to move on, try to live a normal life. But every year on that date, I find myself drawn back to news articles, old records, forgotten forums, searching for any mention of Jefferson High, hoping someone else has spoken up. But the internet is strangely quiet, as if something is still suppressing the story. And that's when I understood the most terrifying truth of all, that those children are not bound to that building alone. They are bound to silence, to denial, to every person who knows the truth but chooses not to speak it. And as long as their story remains buried, they will keep returning, sitting in that classroom, waiting for someone to finish what should have been done years ago. And sometimes I wonder they let me leave on purpose, not because I deserve mercy, but because they needed a witness, someone to carry their story beyond those walls. And if you're hearing this now, if my words have reached you, then maybe that's why the memories never stop following me. Because places like Jefferson High don't just trap souls, they trap guilt, and they pass it on to anyone who listens. And tonight, when the clock reaches 2:17 a.m., somewhere in that old school, lockers will slam shut, a classroom door will creak open, and 12 children will take their seats once more, waiting patiently. Because the dead don't always want revenge. Sometimes they just want the truth to be remembered, and until it is, the night shift at Jefferson High will never truly end.